Welcome everybody to the Bridge Club. We will have people coming in and out of the conversation. I will state that in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, please put it in gallery view. It allows you to be able to see everybody's face. When the host is speaking, or like myself when I'm speaking, there's a yellow box around my face, so you'll know who is talking at that time. There is a chat function. It is not mandated for use. Oh, Aaron, you did make it. It is not mandated for use. We do want this to be an open dialogue, but if you do have a question or comment, go ahead and place it in there or raise your hand and we'll get this working. So let's get started. I am really excited to have today our host join us. We've been having lots of conversations here at the Bridge Club with regards to telemedicine. We've been looking at the different facets of it, but the one thing that we have not talked about is VCPRs. And so today we have Dr. Lori Teller. She is currently on the board of directors for the AVMA, and she represents District 8. And she chairs the AVMA State Advocacy. I'm really pumped to have her here. What I found was really interesting, so I've only just recently met Lori, was I'm all about us being people first and professional second. She married her high school sweetheart. I thought that was amazing. Yeah. So with that being said, just before she starts, Lori, how many years have you been married?
We'll celebrate our 30th anniversary this August.
That's fantastic. And with that, that is our host. I'm going to turn it over to her for her to do our toast and get us started on VCPRs.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Catherine. Welcome to all of you. And so my understanding is we raise a glass. So I hope everybody has a beverage. Right now is such an exciting time to be a veterinarian. We have tremendous opportunities to provide virtual care to our clients and patients through telemedicine modalities. Let's grasp these opportunities, meet any challenges head on, because we can provide virtual care to our patients and we can do it right. So this is for you, the originals who strike out towards the great unknown and fear not the missteps, who take the falls and keep on rocking. Rock what you got and let's light up the world. Cheers.
Cheers. That was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. So as Catherine said, I do serve on the AVMA board of directors, and the AVMA has taken a very strong interest in telemedicine. It's coming. Most of y'all have an interest in it. You know it's coming. You're already using it. There are some other practitioners that are a little bit wary about it. The biggest number of questions we get surrounds the veterinary client-patient relationship, which is the VCPR. And the first thing I want to make clear is that you can be doing telemedicine right now in your practice within the VCPR. Every state has a slightly different definition. There are a couple of states that don't have a defined VCPR. But if you, following your state rules, if you have established a VCPR as is outlined in your State Practice Act, then you can be doing telemedicine right now. Where it may be a little bit hard for you is just identifying the correct platform, or how do you want to get involved? What aspects of telemedicine do you want to take on? Do you want to use this for after hours care? Do you want to use this in the middle of the day? Do you have some part-time veterinarians who maybe want to do this when they're at home, especially young moms or even young dads? So there are all sorts of ways that you can integrate telemedicine into your practice right now. And you can do it legally following the current VCPR rules as outlined in your state. So first, do I have any questions on that? Are there things that make y'all nervous with that? Does anybody feel uncomfortable with it? And anybody feel free to speak up anytime. I'm very casual about that. The other thing to point out too, that is not something that we see on the human side, but that we do see on the veterinary side, is we also have federal rules that guide what we can do with telemedicine. And currently, according to the FDA, we cannot establish a VCPR through electronic means or telephonic means. You need to establish a VCPR by either seeing the patient or making timely visits to the premises, such as if it's a shelter or a food production site. But once you have done that, you can once again use all of the telemedicine tools available to you. And actually on the food animal side, veterinarians are really, really good at that. If you think about the vertical integration in poultry medicine, they use telemedicine all of the time, and they're really, really good at it. The other place where the federal rules come into play, or when they do come into play, is specifically if you're going to be prescribing drugs extra labelly. As we all know, there are not a lot of drugs licensed for cats. Many of them are licensed for dogs, or we may be using human drugs and they're not licensed for dogs or cats at all. So the FDA would frown on you establishing a VCPR electronically and then prescribing drugs extra labelly. And then particularly, again, on the food animal side, you cannot write a veterinary feed directive without an established VCPR. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind as far as that goes. Any questions on that? Thoughts, concerns, considerations, things like that?
Lori, you mentioned shelters. I actually haven't heard of shelters as being under that same category. So you said with respect to like large animals visiting the premises, and so if you have knowledge of the premises,
right,
then it's sufficient. But so could you say a little bit more about that? Because I've never heard it used
Sure.
for shelters, and I'm excited by that.
Again, it's going to depend on how each state's practice act is written. But some states, if the shelter is using drugs or anesthetics, spay, neuter, things like that, a lot of shelters don't have full-time veterinarians, but they will have taken on a part-time veterinarian. And if those veterinarians have written protocols for the shelters to follow when a veterinarian is not present, the shelter staff can follow those protocols. So if they have a cat come in with sneezing and the very typical upper respiratory infection symptoms, if there's a protocol in place, the staff can start instituting the appropriate treatment for that. And then of course they need to alert the veterinarian as to what's going on. But they don't have to wait, especially if it's a veterinarian from another town, for 3 or 4 days for a veterinarian to get there before they can start doing something. So does that answer the question, Aaron? Okay.
That's perfect, yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. No, you're welcome. But again, every state is different. So anybody else on that topic? Okay, then the next, the one thing I also want to let y'all know, because the AVMA did pass a policy last year on telemedicine. It's available online. And this is where people get a little confused. So our VCPR is currently written that you cannot establish, or the policy is currently written that you cannot establish a VCPR electronically. You do have to have the in-person exam. And the AVMA feels very strongly, based on the current technology, current laws and regulations, that that is the appropriate place for the VCPR to be right now. But if you read the policy, you will also see where it says, based on ongoing advances in technology, research, things like that, that the policy can evolve. So I do want to make it clear that no policy, no AVMA policy is ever set in stone. As a matter of course, they come up for review every 5 years. And if there is demand by our members for something to be reviewed sooner than that, then we can open up the policy and review it earlier. So currently the AVMA is involved in several pilot studies, developing use cases and things like that for using telemedicine in practice. And we're doing that with small animal, we're doing that with some shelter, we're doing that with some food animal practices and with some equine practices and with some poultry practices, so that we can make sure that we cover all of the bases. And when it's time to reconsider the policy, if we do need to change it, we will. If it's still deemed appropriate as is, then we'll continue to leave it as is. But I wanted y'all to be aware of that. Some people feel very strongly that this is the policy and it should stay that way forever, and other people think, oh my God, what is wrong with you people? That policy needs to change. So
hey, Lori,
our policies do. Yeah.
What guidelines do you guys use to know when it is time to revisit something? Because I feel like there's so many just technology changes, even best practices as far as medicine is concerned, every 5
Sure.
years. So what flags you guys, what flags the board of directors to say, we really need to revisit this? Is it petition? Is it just kind of trolling chat sessions to see what your members are talking about? How do you guys make that decision?
Sure. So anything could be changed. Everything comes up for review every 5 years. So that's an automatic. If we have, as you're probably aware, several councils and committees, and the volunteers that staff those committees are kind of, if that's their area of expertise and they have oversight of that policy, because policies are overseen by the councils and committees, they're kind of on the front lines, and they may say, hey, look, there's some big changes that have gone on here, say something in swine production. We really need to look at this right now. Or if there are changes in animal welfare, some of that could be because there's regulatory changes, some of that could be because of outside consumer demands. But a member of the Animal Welfare Committee could say, can we really revisit this policy sooner than the 5 years?
So the way for a member to get that to change would be for us to basically petition, find out the people on the committee that we're interested in and petition those people. So it's not actually the members that are coming to you.
No, members can also do it directly.
Okay.
If you're a member of the AVMA, you can go online and look at any of the policies, and there's a place to comment right there. If we get enough comments on a policy that warrant attention, especially if they're of a similar nature, then that committee or council can, at their next meeting, go ahead and take a look at it then.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, the other way that we can look at policies too is if you contact your delegates that serve in the House of Delegates, they can also bring things forward through that route. So there's lots of routes. Any other questions on something like that, or on the VCPR in general? What are your thoughts on it? Where would y'all like to see it go?
I'd like to see us be in charge of mandating that change, because before long it's going to be clients that are voting for it. And I'd really like for us to be taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and kind of leading what we want telehealth to look like for our clients and what we want it to look like for our patients. I think that there's something to be said for the population of pets that it's not realistic for them because of either where they live or who their owners are, that it's not necessarily going to be always that we get them in once a year. So I think that those pets will really have to kind of decide, or those animals even in general, will really have to decide, is that really doing no harm? And really making sure that we're really truly checking that out as often as we can as technologies proceed and help us out with that.
Sure. Other thoughts?
Hey, Lori, this is Chad. I know there was some discussion and dialogue earlier this year between Jim Penrod and AVSB and trying to communicate some messaging back to the AVMA. Is there any update that's coming from that, from their, I'll say, comments to the policy? Because I know a lot of that had to do with the VCPR, but
sure.
There are also other aspects of it. So I'm just curious if there's any updates that are coming.
Yeah, and that's a great question. As some of y'all probably know, the AVMA and the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges, and also the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, had a joint statement about telehealth, which included the VCPR. The AVMA's Model Veterinary Practice Act is currently up for revision. It's one of those, just like any other policy, that comes up every 5 years. And a working group was convened to work on that. And that working group is just now wrapping up the work that they do, and the board will hopefully see that report very soon. Because the Model Veterinary Practice Act impacts all of us who practice veterinary medicine, once the board sees it, that will automatically be sent to the House of Delegates for their consideration. And when that happens, that will also be open to the entire membership to make comment on. It is not likely that that will happen before the fall, to go before the House of Delegates for their winter meeting. So I would encourage all of you, when it is released, that you read through it thoroughly, all parts of it, not just the VCPR part. But do read through it, and if you have thoughts or comments, please submit those to your delegates that represent you in the House. The flip side of that is that the AAVSB also has their own Model Veterinary Practice Act that has been open for comment during the springtime also. and they have compiled those comments, and that report will be released to their board, which is made up of the various state board members of the various state boards at their meeting in the fall. And so the AVMA did comment on theirs, and they did comment on ours. And since all of those are going to come together in the fall, then hopefully at that point we'll have a better idea of where we are. And the two groups are in regular communication. Members of the AVMA do go to the AAVSP meeting. And of course, Jim and some of his people come to the AVMA meeting. So no real update now, other than that both sides are very much in communication and trying to work together on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other thoughts? There are lots of people here. What are y'all thoughts on the VCPR?
Lori, I just have a quick question. This is Jill. And I've heard you use the term telemedicine and telehealth.
Yeah.
Is there anything that distinguishes the two, and how might AVMA take different stances based on the definition of telehealth or telemedicine?
And I think that's a great question. So according to the AVMA's telehealth report that came out and its policy, telehealth we're using is the overarching term. So that can include if you're just providing general advice. And so it really is a great question, because one thing to keep in mind is you may be contacted by people who are not your clients. So you have not established a VCPR, but they're looking for some kind of information. And so you are certainly within your rights to provide a very general level of information. You can't do diagnoses, you can't do treatments, you can't do prescribing. But if you're contacted by somebody whose pet is having diarrhea, you are certainly welcome to provide some general advice and let them know they do need to see a veterinarian. These are some things the veterinarian may take into consideration, things like that. The other thing to point out is that the AVMA policy does also recognize that there will be times that you may be contacted that's a true emergency. Certainly our poison control hotlines fall under that. If your dog falls into the pool and is drowning, heat stroke, all of those are certainly true emergencies and you need to see a veterinarian, but they may be contacting you saying, what can I do to help my pet till I can get to the vet? And so those are areas where you can certainly provide some general information and give them things they can do until they can get in to be seen by the veterinarian. I'm from Houston, Texas, so this certainly came into big play during Hurricane Harvey. Others of you that may have been involved with hurricanes or the wildfires, things like that, you know that it was just truly impossible for maybe you to get to work, or certainly for your client to get a patient into your office. And so there are things that telemedicine can be very useful for to serve those purposes. Did that answer your question, Jill?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and we're kind of, as the human world is going to the term virtual care, we're actually trying to embrace the term virtual care to be all encompassing, within telemedicine being much more specific with the diagnosing and treatment aspects of that. Because it's more than telephonic means, right? A lot of it's electronic apps, websites, things like that. And it's only going to get bigger. The technology is only going to expand from there.
Hey, Lori, would you mind talking about whether or not VCPR is actually linked to the individual doctor's license, or to their practice, or to their facility license, or to whomever happens to be seeing patients that day?
Right.
Would you kind of expound on that a bit? Because I think that's
Sure.
kind of a gray area for a lot of practicing.
It's a gray area for a lot of practitioners. It's a gray area for a lot of state boards. We actually just had a big debate about that in Texas. And currently our state board interprets it as the VCPR is between the specific veterinarian, client, and patient. The only exception that our state board will make for that is that another veterinarian in the practice can authorize drug refills. So if I happen to be out of the office and one of my patients needs a refill on Apoquel or something like that, a chronic med, they can go ahead and refill it without having to see the patient. So that seems to be where most of the states stand. I certainly don't want to pretend to be an expert on every state, but it seems to be that right now it is standing with the veterinarian. I know that that was a very hot topic with the working group that was working on the Model Veterinary Practice Act also. And last I heard, that's where they were leaving it also, that it stood with the veterinarian of record.
Is there any leeway for that for locums that have been going through the practices by any chance?
Well, so that was what triggered the whole conversation in Texas. There doesn't seem to be, if you ask our board attorney, any leeway. But of course, then the attorney and everyone else will qualify that by saying we're complaint driven. So if the relief veterinarian is covering a practice that day and a client of that clinic calls and says, this is what's going on, and the relief veterinarian feels comfortable, the relief vet's probably going to say, you can do this and see how it goes, and contact Dr. Smith tomorrow or whenever he's back if it's an ongoing issue, or come in and see me if it doesn't get better. But
awesome. Thank you for that.
yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else? Thoughts? Questions? Rob, how about Fuzzy? How are things going there?
Yeah, things are actually going pretty well here. We continue to see the number of people interacting with us through the various means of, telemedicine that we provide. We see it rapidly increasing. I'd actually probably prefer to let Jess speak to this because she's our main point person running on this. So probably let her speak to it better than I.
Yeah, I was actually just going to jump in and ask you a question about that. We're seeing huge utilization of our telemedicine program with all of our members and our clients. But my question for you is, what do you determine a recommendation to be? So if I had someone who we had not ever, one of our doctors never laid hands on the pet, but they come through and say, do you recommend a raw diet for my kitten? I can't say no, right? Because that's a recommendation. Like, where do you draw the line for what a recommendation truly is?
It's a real gray zone. It's one of those other complications of the VCPR, because even if you tell a client no treatment is needed, right, that's still a recommendation. You're still doing something. So a lot of it's going to be with what you're comfortable with, what your state board has come down and said. If you say, I think a raw diet's great for your kitten, or I'm comfortable when I have it's just so much how you word it, right? So I'm not a big fan of raw diets, and I really don't think kittens should eat it. Or I'm okay with raw diets, and for some of my clients, I think it's appropriate. You've given a recommendation without actually giving a recommendation. What would your liability insurance coverage say if the client came back and was mad at you for that? And that's where it all gets really, really fuzzy. So some of it's going to involve, are you keeping a record of these conversations? If you're using a telemedicine modality, that's probably being recorded and stored, because that's part of it. So you may have a way, if the client does come back and say, I got salmonella from feeding my kitten raw food, and depending on how you answer that question, you may or may not be protected.
Sure. I think that's kind of my biggest beef with our current VCPR regulations, is that there's so many people out there that would rather talk to a veterinarian rather than spending hours paging through Dr. Google finding information that may or may not be accurate, but I legally can't help them because of our VCPR laws. And so, I mean, I totally get, if I'm going to diagnose or treat or prescribe, I want to have touched that animal before. Yeah. But for these general advice sorts of situations, I would love to see our VCPR laws adapt so that we can provide people better general advice to point them in the right direction. Even the little things like, can I wash my dog's cut before I take him to the vet tomorrow? Sure, that's a treatment recommendation, but it's not in an emergency situation, but I'm getting them through until they get to the vet. Yeah, and I know, it's all complaint driven, right? So all depends whether or not they're going to try to sue me over washing their dog's
Right. Washington.
paw.
Right.
But all the same, you know, in the spirit of pushing things forward and improving our laws and improving the life of pets, right now we're not improving the life of pets with our current regulations.
Yeah, I understand. I have a monthly radio show where we take live callers, and I have to be very careful how I word my answers to their questions, because they're all calling about their specific pets when they're calling. So yeah.
Well, even to your point, Jessica, it's more of a, is that truly doing no harm? Because inaction, as we know, can be just as detrimental to pets as the wrong action, so to speak. And so I think to your point that's definitely an area where our field in general is doing a disservice to those clients that are looking for the right action rather than being inactive and having to be reactive when they get to the clinic.
So everyone, I'm going to jump in really quick. We are at our 25-minute mark, 26 to be exact. And so for those of you who need to exit, we always keep true to our word so that you can exit out. If you've got questions and you need to leave, go ahead and throw those in the chat and Lori will answer those. Otherwise, Lori has agreed to stay on for another about 10 minutes so that we can continue the conversation, but just wanted to make sure I was letting people to exit if they needed to. And so Lori, it's back on to you.
Okay, great. I'm going to go back and ask Justin, because you are perfect proof that you can use telemedicine in a situation where you've already established a VCPR with a client. And y'all have found that to work and be very successful for you. So what would you say to other veterinarians who are feeling very hesitant about it? Is there something they should be scared of? Is it something they should go ahead and try? What would you say to them?
I would say that if they're not trying it, then they're doing their own clients a huge disservice. You know, we started telemedicine as like, oh, let's start a chat box on our website. We never actually intended people to like want to use it quite so much. But now we have people who come to us and say, hey, what should I do? And we tell them like, sorry, you know, we don't have a VCPR, so you have to go to a full service, but they end up coming back to us because there is that option for them. And so it's been a huge customer acquisition tool. We have incredible utilization, and it ends up being a really great push for additional revenue and services as well, because you help somebody with something stupid and little one time. Like, no, you don't need to come in because your puppy has a hair in its eye. You know, here's how you can do that. But then when they need to spend $300 on that diarrhea panel, like, yeah, they're going to do it because we saved them money the first time. And so granted, everything we do is on a membership basis. And so people aren't paying every time they get to talk to us, which is great because then they talk to us all the time, and it builds the trust and it builds the relationships. And they know that we have their pet's best interest at heart and not how much they're going to be paying us at heart. So it's, you know, having worked in several different veterinary care models now, doing this telemedicine with a membership basis, I think is by far and away been the best way to do it, because there's no limit to the number of times that people can use this. And now we have people literally saying like, oh, it's easier to ask you than it is to ask Dr. Google.
Right.
And that has been the like, we're doing this right. You know, they want real advice from their vet before they go, you know, scrolling through the pages of Google. So it's been an awesome experiment. And yeah, I'd love to see other vets utilizing it. But the biggest concern that I've been getting from them is that they're already working 50 hours a week and they can't keep, you know, being available after hours and weekends and things like that, which is certainly when we are fairly heavy utilized is the after hours and weekends.
Right. Yeah. Cal, do you have any thoughts coming from Ask.Vet that you want to share?
I think everything that's been said is right. I think it's what customers really want, right? It's what the consumers really want and demand. And as you know, we've been doing texting for the last 2 years. We're moving away from, well, we'll continue to do it, but our focus is moving away from texting and moving more towards voice through both Amazon and through Google. We'll be launching that on the first week of June. So I'll be sure to get the notification to all of you so you can all try it and test it. You can see the devices right behind me here. We've been working on this for 8 months now. We've taken the corpus of all of our text and transferred that into essentially a triage chatbot, which we'll be launching. And ultimately, the goal will be to answer questions for consumers, but put them in touch with a veterinarian right through the device. So that's what we'll be doing. And at some point, maybe in a future meeting, we'll be happy to give you a demo and show you how all that works. But I think it's clear that it's what consumers want is instantaneous access to the trusted voice of the veterinarian. And as you know, we spent 2 years working very hard to train and to hire and train and to continue to perfect our best practices so that we stay within the lines of VCPR. But I think we can extend that a little bit more in terms of how we can deliver advice and recommendations. I think that we could still provide a great service in what the consumers want. And I don't really find that a distraction of what to either revenue or what hospital and clinic owners want, because ultimately most of the questions that we field are questions that people wouldn't go to a veterinary hospital and clinic anyway to get answered. And otherwise what they're doing is they're using Dr. Google to get these answers. And we all know that they generally make bad decisions because the information isn't clear, it's technical, there's a lot of it's conflicting. So our view is the more we can help consumers, the better off they are making the right decisions because they know that decision is guided by an expert voice.
Great, thank you very much for that. Shay, do you have any thoughts coming from the hospice side?
I've just got to unmute her. There she goes.
Don't get me started. It's more, it all just to me goes back to having a little bit of common sense within the VCPR. We have patients who are at end of life. We already have a diagnosis. We've already spoken to the referring veterinarian. Owners don't want to do any more tests. They just want palliation. And there's so much we can do for so many pets out there, but our hands are tied to be able to do so unless we've actually touched them. So we're leaving a whole segment of pets that could have such a better quality of life for the time that remains because they don't want to bring them into a clinic. And it may have been, it's so that's to me a common sense area that it makes sense that maybe we should have a little bit of latitude towards the language for families that say, we're done. We just want palliation until the end of life.
Thank you for that. Other thoughts? Julie, do the technicians have thoughts?
Oh, I'm sure we do. I think that we can help out a lot in this area. But it's concerning to us too, as far as how much we can do alone or under the, supervision of a doctor too. So.
Great.
I think so much of it comes back to when you start to look at just the human-animal bond and the act of dragging an animal into a clinic when you feel like they may need care, regardless of whether or not that pet truly did. We've damaged that bond between that person and that pet if it was truly an unnecessary visit. And I think that is some of it. And just even thinking back to the point of hospice, to Shay's point, it's one of those things that really it's about the relief of animal suffering, right? And regardless of how you see what that suffering may be, it could be long-standing diarrhea, it could be an eyelash in the eye, it could be end-of-life discussions. That is something that's part of our oath, and I think that there's a big part of our population in our field that's going to have to start to push that box as we feel driven by our oath.
I think we need to be sure that we remember what we're here for, and that is to help the client relieve them from the unknown, the fear that they have of the unknown. And we are the professionals, and somehow we've got to take this VCPR and expand it in such a way that we can do that, because we are, at the end of the day, the ones that need to give the advice, not someone on the internet that's not a professional. So when we can put that fear aside and say, okay, you don't need to go to the emergency clinic in this situation. You don't have to worry about that tonight, within reason of what we're able to see and talk to them about. Or, you should go see your veterinarian tomorrow. This is most likely what they're going to say to you. I just don't see any other way around this. We're going to have to utilize this to relieve that fear. clients, pet owners, don't have a perspective when it comes to their pets. In other words, they have a perspective about a child because their mother or their father took care of them when they were a child. And when they had the same illness or the same symptoms, they'd say, oh, well, mom did this or dad did that. But with a pet, they don't have that perspective. So they want someone that can give them an idea of what they should do, at least in the interim, before they go see a veterinarian.
So at that point, I have us at our 10 minutes. So don't you love how I am the taskmaster? But I want to make sure everyone is able to achieve what they wanted to achieve. So at this particular point in time, if you have any additional questions, you can either submit them into the chat. You can email Dr. Teller. You want to provide your email address, Lori?
Yeah, so my email address is Snoopy, as in Snoopy, doc, D-O-C, @gmail.com.
So our intention here is if you've got questions, go to the expert and engage in those conversations. We don't want to be that filter for you. We want to make sure that that's part of what the Bridge Club offers. I will say that next week, or not, is it next week? June 6th, we're actually having a conversation on who owns the pet record and where things are moving towards. And so that will be taking place, I believe, in the afternoon. And that's with Carrie Marshall. So I know that was a question that kind of came up earlier. We are going to be having that discussion as well. But with that said, I want to thank absolutely everybody for coming. I want to raise our glass one more time and thank our wonderful host, Dr. Teller, for sharing with us. I think this was really, really helpful and pivotal in our conversations with regards to telemedicine. So everyone, cheers.
Cheers. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lori.